And what's your Well, hello everyone. This is Curt Doolittle from the Natural Law Institute. I'm here with our charming fellow Luke Weinhagen, and we're here discussing his book, which is called The Primal Primer: Survive Anything, Slay Anxiety, and Exit the System. I like anything with the word primal in it. It speaks to me. So tell me, first of all, a lot of what I'm sort of curious about, and I wanted to bring to the audience is, you had a couple of agendas here, and one of them is a positioning agenda. What you're actually saying here would be called philosophy if it were written one way. It would be called life advice, or actually sort of the spirituality or something on another level, right? I mean, there's you can present this kind of information you're trying to approach a couple of ways. So I sort of don't know which question to ask first, but I think I get furthest if we just talk about the choice of title. So if you
Sure.
could sort of tell us a story of how you came up with this title, and then we'll get into how you positioned the work itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a lot of iteration on the title itself, right? There's a lot of, tried a lot of things on before we got to this title itself. A couple of the things that I'm trying to accomplish with the title is, the book does harken back to a set of skills that was just inherent to being human for a very, very long time. Right? And that's where the primal comes into it, right? It's also plays on the appeal of the term itself in the market today, right? There's a lot of things that are labeled primal right now, and there's definitely a draw just to the terminology itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that I'm trying to leverage that, but I'm also trying to convey that what we're exploring in the book is things that were just essential aspects of being human for almost the entirety of human history.
I'm not sure the were
Right, exactly. Well, that's the problem that I'm trying to articulate throughout the whole book, is that we perceive it as a word, and we never should have gotten to a point where we could perceive it as a word. Right, that's the big issue. And as far as primer goes, it's actually it's a term that nowadays a lot of people just aren't familiar with. But a primer is just an elementary book, right? It is a book that explains a topic at an elementary level, and that was the goal with this book. I'm not getting into any major complexity with the work here. It really is intended to be a primer. It is that foundational source, that entry level source to get into the material.
A primer is back when we were ladies and gentlemen, it was the term for a dummy's guide.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Back when we were ladies and gentlemen, you could get primers on up, or if you were properly educated, a primer.
Right. Exactly.
As my grandmother would say, on manners, lots of things, right? I mean, so that's where it came from. But you're trying to reach a certain audience with that kind of message, and it's like, I'm a nerd, so I wouldn't normally just target something to the intellectual audience, which in this case would be useless.
Right.
And so you chose, which is what you're very consistent about among the thinkers in our group, which is you chose to go right to the source, right? To restore or require the knowledge of what it's required to be a functioning human from the bottom up.
Yes.
Whereas I tend to think in terms of political systems and legal systems and institutions. So what made you? What did you have to consider in order to think about reaching what audience? I mean, what's the audience, and what did you have to consider when reaching them, out?
Yeah, and very much like you say, my focus with this and with my work in general is more of a bottom up approach, right? The work that we do as a group is very, very much geared towards steering the ship in a correct direction, right? I'm trying to make sure that the ship can survive the trip. I want the people, that we're engaging with to be able to adopt all the work that we're putting together. I want them to be able to integrate it and use it and apply it.
In other words,
Right?
you need the foundation of a consistent and correspondent. In other words, you need an empirical, which is what you're really saying, an
Yes.
empirical understanding of what's required to be a fully functioning human,
Right.
despite the intermediation that science and technology
Right.
and scale have sort of produced for us. And we might be forgetting that these are basic requirements for humans. And then to some degree, I'm more concerned right now about human males, because of one of the key points I'm sure you'll touch on later. So it's, you're trying to provide the very basics in an accessible form. Is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So one of the ways I've shared it, and that, I don't know, seems to help people understand it, is, so I've got 4 kids, right? And our kids are very spread out in ages, right? My oldest is 29 and my youngest is 4, right? And I've got kids in between as well, right? So between, watching.
Does this mean they're all accidents?
No,
I'm
it just
gonna
means
cover
we had
my mouth with my.
different priorities at different times. I will say that, they're all like late summer, early fall babies, so it gets really cold in Minnesota in the winter.
Yeah, I hear you. So anyway, I'm just making fun.
So
mine are spread out too, so I can't complain.
Right. But because of that, I see my parents' generation, my generation, and then I've got, I'm a Gen X guy, right? My parents are boomers. I'm a Gen X guy. My oldest kid is a millennial. I've got a kid that's Gen Z. I've got kids now that are in this Gen Alpha that they're going through. And so I've got this perspective of all these intergenerational cohorts, right? And I'm seeing this phenomenon emerge as I'm watching them interacting with their peers, as I'm watching them interacting with the society at large that they're engaged with, right? That's influencing their transition from childhood to adulthood. And I'm seeing, basically what I'm seeing in that process is that transition is being disrupted, that we're not actually reaching adulthood anymore.
Okay, the transition to adulthood is.
Yeah, the transition to adulthood is being disrupted. It's being delayed. It's being suppressed. It's being undermined, right? We're not actually going through that transition in the way that we used to, as human beings living in an environment that forced us to go through that transition from childhood into adulthood, right? Where we were completely, it's a transition from at birth at 100 complete dependence on the family, the tribe, the everything for your existence, to that point of being self-sustaining in your environment as an individual.
Sorry, can I just want
to? Yeah, no, jump in.
I'm thinking of objections as you're talking, so I want to handle them in advance. So the thing is, how would you frame today? Because we're not actually independent.
Right.
We have this illusion that we're independent, but it's actually an illusion, right? I mean, you're dependent on. I mean, frankly, we're dependent upon the guy who pumps the oil out of the well and gets that through the process and turns it into food and energy and makes sure that it all gets to us. And he's invisible from the discourse. Right. Pissed off about it, frankly.
Right.
And we're all dependent upon them, and we think we're independent.
Yes.
So I mean, what I'm trying to do is get to the question, which is, you said, okay, we have these. You're trying to turn us into independent people. And people would seem to think that we're in this place of being independent, but are we?
No, and that's the hard sell of the book. Right. That's the most challenging concept to convey in the book. Everything else in there just adds on to that, but that is the crux of the entire missive. Is that point right there? Is that we've so normalized our state of dependence that we don't even recognize it anymore as being different from what independence means or has meant for the vast majority of human history.
So before I go into, I know you're right, but I want to say, so what's the harm?
Right.
Right. So let's, before we go into how you're actually working through fixing this problem, I don't want to take for granted that everyone equally understands the problem exists. So, so what's the harm of being our independent, disconnected from the laws of nature, disconnected from the guys who actually do the work that keep us.
Right.
What's the problem with it?
Well, in doing that, we've separated ourselves from evolutionary pressures. We've removed ourselves from the sharpening stone.
Yes.
Right. We've wrapped the sharpening stone in bubble wrap.
Yes.
Right. We're not sharpening ourselves anymore.
Forgotten that we ever needed it.
Right. Exactly. In the same way that, most of us, we don't require, enormous amounts of strength. We don't require the ability to chase prey over long distances any longer. We don't require those things in our day-to-day lives anymore. And yet, if we don't practice those things, our bodies deteriorate.
Correct. We
start to manifest dysfunction in our physical selves, in our physical ability to navigate our environments.
So we're not free of the obligations for physical, emotional, psychological, and mental fitness, right? We just
Correct.
get to choose a nicer way of achieving them.
Exactly.
Is that really the recipe? Is that before we didn't need willpower,
right.
we had the laws of nature threatening us at all times.
Yes.
And today, in order to maintain physical, emotional, psychological, and cognitive fitness, we actually have to deliberately choose to maintain that. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. That because technology has made a separation possible, we now have to, with intent, introduce those proxies. Just like we do with our physical systems, we have gyms, we have marathons, we have trainers that teach us this stuff, right? We've developed and introduced proxies for those pressures, and there's safer pressures than nature itself would impose upon us, right? So that's a good and valuable thing, right? But we have to do the same thing with all of our other elements, with all the other aspects that all the other traits that make us human, and we're not doing that right now. We don't have those proxies in place in a large way.
That's why we've stopped getting healthier. We're starting to get sicker.
Right. And just like with our physical bodies,
and crazier. Let's add.
Yes, absolutely.
Crazier is happening.
Yeah. One of the big things that we talk about in our group is the attention market. And I think we're seeing a lot of dysfunction in the attention market. And one of the reasons that's the case is we don't have a good proxy for that perceptual fitness that each of us needs to develop. We don't have our ability to even interpret the signals from our environment effectively.
We're not engaging in interpersonal, interfamilial, interpersonal, intersocial, even interpolitical self-regulation, right? We're not regulating each other within the limits of behavior that nature really demands.
Right.
And so can I be a nerd for a second and say that this is the problem in economic cycles, right? We keep extending the economic cycle, thinking we're doing better. What's really happening is we're producing a catastrophe that's increasingly difficult to recover from, right?
Yes.
When what you're saying is, well, dude, that doesn't just happen in economics. It happens in generations, and it happens in your life.
Yes.
Right. And if you don't follow this, okay.
Yeah, it's always interesting how well economic models express human behavior.
That's what we do, right? We explain that the laws of nature are consistent across all scales.
Right.
And we explain it to people. They're like, what does that mean? And I'm like, let me show you.
Right.
Here's the guy that's going to tell you what it means to your life if you don't understand. Right. And Luke comes along, right? So to not get too far from it. So we have two questions I've still got open that I don't feel. I'm so excited to talk about the next thing that I want to make sure I close the previous two questions, which is who I see this as more generally available than what I saw as your pitch. In other words, I understand who you're pitching this to because they're a more likely audience. But my when I read it, I'm like, I want more because this is generally It's applicable to everyone.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I know you said you're going to work on that in the next one, but I'm just trying to put it in place this is generally applicable to every human being. Even though he's trying to target it to a particular audience that's going to resonate with the primal concept because they're the ones most desirous of answering the problem, right? And is that my putting words in your mouth?
And they're also the most likely to be the early adopters.
Yes.
Of the information, and so that they can become the advocates for it into other other audiences, right? And that's a big part of it too. It's one of those, every marketing, lesson or program or whatever, they always tell you have to pick a market. And the problem with writing a book like this is it's applicable to everybody.
Right.
So the focus is really more of a positional focus than it is a material focus.
Correct. So, but that just allows you, I mean, it's like, I always think of Taleb because he's tried to solve a similar problem that I did the wrong way, but that's okay.
Yes.
So he tried to solve a similar problem. So he just wrote a series of books until he got there. Right. I mean, and this is sort of how I look at your work, is it's going to take a series of books that build on each other over time, which I'm sure doesn't make you personally or financially that thrilled, but it's a lot of work.
It's what we signed up for.
But all right. So the second question was, I want to make sure we're clear on it, which is, well, so what? We're insulated from the laws of nature. We don't no longer have to take care of physical, emotional, psychological, and cognitive care of ourselves because we're dependent on so many others for all these other feedbacks. And this great big network is keeping us alive. But you're saying the cumulative consequence of this, of not only not taking care of ourselves, but not demanding it of each other, that it's producing negative consequences. And so could you address that a little bit? Because I want to get to, I want to make sure nobody's looking at this saying, well, no, it's really good. It's not. They're going to learn over the next 10 years, but because that's what it's going to correct. But anyway.
Right. And just for the purpose of clarity, my entire argument is not one of regression. I'm not suggesting we go back to living in caves, right? That's not the intent here. My purpose here
there's no Luddism here, right?
No.
Here. Yes.
No, my purpose is to position us to be capable of integration as the new pressures are introduced, as the new demands for our attention and the new stresses are placed upon us. We, with the solid foundation under us, we can integrate all of those pressures. We can integrate all of the new into what it means to be human. But without that foundation, we cannot. Right. And that's kind of that's the gap that I'm trying to fill with this stuff. Say your question again.
I like, what I'm trying to get at is, well, why correct? Right. I mean, because what I hear in my mind as I hear the Netwit Brigade saying, somebody else will take care of that.
Right. Yeah.
Or I don't need to be fit, or I'm happy the way I am.
Right.
Or why
fat acceptance, right?
It's basically kicking the can down the road.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
And so you're basically being irresponsible. And I'm like, well, I mean, if you want to be irresponsible, fine. But the problem when you're personally irresponsible, you leave it up to the guys who are politically responsible to solve the problem. Which is, I think, what you and I try to do.
Right. Yeah.
We're trying to solve. We're like, Luke is like, here, personally solve the problem, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to politically solve the problem, right? I mean, because somebody's got to be the freaking adult in the room, which is, I guess, your whole message is that there need to be enough adults somehow. At some level. Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yeah, that is what I'm getting at. I'm trying to reintroduce our ability to transition into adults. We, as humans, it is possible for us to live under suboptimal conditions, right? We demonstrate that over and over again, right? And we can do that for very, very long periods of time. The longer we live under suboptimal conditions, the more likely those suboptimal conditions are going to continue. We really start limiting ourselves.
It becomes recursive, yes.
Right, it becomes recursive. One of the it's an old term, but one of the terms I introduced in the book or reintroduced to people in the book is the concept of the Lindy effect. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Effectively, what that means is that the longer something's been in place, the more likely it is to continue to be in place. One of the examples frequently used for that is the Bible. The Bible's been being published for hundreds of years, so it's likely to continue to be published for hundreds of years, right? That's the Lindy effect, right? The longer it's been happening, the more likely it's going to continue to happen.
I use group evolutionaries. I use the metaphysical presumptions and group evolutionary strategies. Like, we don't even know they exist, and they get perpetuated over and over and over again.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's actually a very strong phenomenon in human interaction, right? I mean, it's baked into how it's part of our sense making. It's part of how we navigate, the new and the unfamiliar is by tapping into what is familiar, right? And so because of that, what is under optimal conditions, that's a strength. But as we continue under suboptimal conditions, it becomes a weakness because we perpetuate those suboptimal conditions. We maintain them. We move them forward with us, right? And we become less functional as we do that. We become more vulnerable as we do that. One of the paths of research that I tap into frequently in the book is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That his frame or his theory of the hierarchy of needs, right? That's one of the pieces of material that I use throughout the book, right? Or I leverage throughout the book. It's a triangle. That's what a hierarchy is, right? And we use triangles all the time in our work to communicate concepts, right? And so that this one's an important one in this regard, is that the triangle is stable because its base is wider than any other part of the triangle.
Right.
So each layer is wider than the layer atop it, right? And that's what makes it stable and functional and hard to tip. That's what makes it, that's what reduces or eliminates the exploitation available within the structure.
The adaptability of the top is dependent upon the stability of the bottom.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes.
Exactly. Now, when from the point or the perspective of the hierarchy of needs, the bottom two layers is where I'm focusing. That physiological needs and then that safety and security needs is where I'm focusing, because that's what we've lost. That's what we've abandoned. That's what we've forfeited in a large way. That's what we've become dependent on others for more than anything else. So what we've done is we've turned that triangle into a diamond. And standing a diamond on end is very, very unstable. Mm-hmm. But that's what we're doing with our needs.
So we're leaving behind the foundational metaphysical presumptions, cultural presumptions, norms, traditions, values, and habits that made possible the luxury condition we live under today, right?
Right. And it compromises all the needs that supports.
We're not actually evolving, we're spending down accumulated content.
Yes. Yeah, we are extracting momentum out of a system our forefathers created or passed along to us. And it eliminates.
All I hear is selfish people saying, well, good, I don't care about you.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is this whole concept right now that we see in social media, particularly of privilege. People don't recognize, because we've abandoned these things, people don't even recognize the state of privilege that they're all in. It's like children yelling at each other about whose daddy's the best. Right?
Well, I kind of get pissed off, and I'm like, if white privilege is so offensive to you, then why did you come here to take advantage of it?
And why are you staying?
And why are you staying? Because all white privilege is that we've developed a reputation, essentially, because of our habits, norms, traditions, values, and institutions of non-aggression and reciprocity, except for retaliation. All right. Yeah. So your book.
We also lose that flexibility you talked about at the top when we lose that base, right? Because it's no longer supported. Right. So then those are kind of what I'm getting at when I say we start to deteriorate. We start to that suboptimal becomes ingrained.
I think that the advances in technology, which is a small advance, right? It's the advancement. It's like we captured petroleum energy, right? And we got a huge boom out of that. Right. Well, we figured out the transistor, and we're getting a huge boom out of that. Right. But what's missing is you're not seeing the same progress at the same rates we had before in innovation at all. And in the foundations of science, like physics, it hasn't gone anywhere since the 70s. And we have 40 times the people in it as we had then, and it's not going anywhere. Yeah. So that's telling us something, right? I mean, and worse. I mean, I don't want to drag this in the wrong direction, but Scott Adams came out and said, right, it turns out that the anti-vaxxers won the argument because the method they choose to go by was actually better method, which was skepticism. Right. It wasn't knowledge of the subject matter. It was knowledge of the behavior of the people using the subject matter.
Yes.
They said this doesn't sound right. Right. So we've gotten this place where, as people say, trust the science. And I'm like, the past week I've been writing about, you don't even know what the word means.
Right.
it doesn't mean that if I publish a paper, that's science. It means that if my paper survives competition in the market over time, right, that is science.
Right.
It's not science until it survives. Anyway,
I would argue that in addition to not understanding what the word science means, nobody understands what the word trust means anymore.
Trust means anymore, exactly.
So they're
right,
broken on both ends of that conversation.
All right. So I was trying to answer. I think we did a good job. We explained the title. We explained what your mission is and who you're trying to reach and why. And we've explained that the kicking the can down the road is producing the diamond effect, which is essentially burning down accumulated capital.
Yes.
And then we're seeing this decline everywhere. And we're seeing it in the present generation that's frustrated because they might live off worse than their parents for the first time in a long time.
Yes.
And so we're seeing this happen. And so it's not like you're just making this up for some emotional, inspirational reason. It's you're positioning it in what I consider vox populi, an accessible method.
Yes.
Right. In order to solve what is actually, what a guy like me would write a paper about.
Yes.
Right. I mean, you're trying to reach the people that it really matters with. And so I think if we make those 3 points, we've said that this is actually a pretty serious bit of work that you've put together deceptively. Deceptively serious bit of work put together in friendly prose. Anyway.
Yeah.
It's like I would say that book. What is that book? The Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten that came out. I don't know. It was a long time ago.
Yeah, it was.
It just turns out that stupid book is so true.
Right.
Right. And well, this is one of those things. It's like don't underestimate what you're reading here. Anyway, chapter 1. Now that we've done, I've spent 30 minutes interviewing you on just the basic concept and what you're doing. I like how you started out chapter 1, which is how we failed you. You didn't blame.
No.
You're not blaming Joe Sixpack, right? You're saying how we failed you. So explain what that means.
Sure. So, and that's a huge element of what I'm trying to, or how I frame the entire book. This isn't some individual flaw. This isn't you being less than. This isn't because you are in error. You're making some gigantic. The reader is the you.
Or an act of selfishness. Right? It's not.
Right.
There's no immorality to it.
Right. You're not bad or broken. Right. Yep. You're very rationally responding to very dysfunctional inputs. And those dysfunctional inputs have been building in this system we've created, in this culture and society and the institutions that we've created, right? We with the purest of intentions, we've created structure to meet people's needs where they could not meet them themselves, right? We've introduced that intentionally to help support people that aren't able to do so themselves, right? But then the response to that has been an increase in our individual dependence on those systems. And then the system very, very intentionally, or very, with the purest intentions again, responds and expands to accommodate for those needs, right? And so we create this cycle of expanding dependence that gets us further and further away from that feedback from nature, that pressure from nature, and so it's right, yeah, right. and that's how I frame it in a lot of ways. Is we're extending childhood ever further into what ought to be adulthood, right? We're breaking that transition. We're not completing that transition from childhood to adulthood in doing all of this.
I just call that responsibility, but is that
right? Yeah. But there's the point that I'm making throughout the book is that there's some very specific competencies that we need in place in order to take responsibility. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that the book sets out to provide, or to restore, or to rebuild, or give people access to. Right?
Well, how did we fail? What led us to fail transitioning people into adulthood?
Right. So we can go back a couple different ways. I think this process really started with the Industrial Revolution. That's where my research points to as the start point of this real separation. But it was a very slow development at that point, right? I mean, we basically we expanded
employment. Mass employment,
right,
created mass dependence.
Right. Yeah. We expanded the division of labor outside of our foundation, outside of our individual foundation. And that started to create the abandonment of that foundation. Right. That foundation of being able to provide for your own needs. That is the foundation for being human. Right. So prior to that, all of us, all humans in their daily lives had to practice the skills that I put together in the book. Right. It was part of us being part of our environment, like every other animal is a part of their environment, right? You had to know how to source food. You had to know how to source water. You had to know how to create shelter or some sort of protection from elements, right? I mean, we've done, prior to that, we did other things. We had farming before that. We had all kinds of other, all kinds of other resource acquisition methodology before that. But in the Industrial Revolution is when it really started to accelerate and outpace our ability to maintain that foundation, right? We just gained so much so fast from it that we couldn't keep up. We couldn't keep the competency levels up with.
Okay, so progress. Can I have in my mind a beautiful video, one of those videos that's been restored in color. Restored in colorized. I don't remember exactly when it is. It's either 1890s or early 1900s.
Yeah.
And the factory's letting out at 3:00 in the afternoon. Some guy's got one of those.
Yeah.
Whatever millimeter it was, cameras out there, and he's filming these workers, and it's in the UK, England, coming out of work in the factory. And there's groups of men, and it's funny because they're wearing what today look like suits, but they're not. They're just cut like suits. They're actually workman's clothes, right? And so they're coming out, but there's boys and girls, and they've been working in the factory all the time. Right. Now, the interesting thing is, what's the behavior of the kids versus the adults? It's not very different.
No.
Right? Their behavior is the same. Their reaction to seeing the novelty of the camera is the same.
Right.
So it wasn't entirely. There's a big difference between the hardship of the farm and the hardship of the factory. I mean, people went to factories for good reasons because it's better than farming, right? I mean, there's just no question about it, right? And so, but then you say what role? Because see, I blame a lot of it on education.
Yeah.
So do you see education playing its role in there?
Well, yeah, education was another one of the pieces that came with the industrial education came with the Industrial Revolution.
I see.
Right. So prior to that,
these are two things tied together.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I say, and it was, like I said, it was a slow transition. It wasn't a light switch, right? It took generations after these things happened for it to really start impacting us. But prior to that, education was in the home or in the small community. So it was still in direct contact with the parents are going out to butcher the chicken for dinner, right? But then we get into the school, and when's the last time an industrial school butchered the rabbits for lunch that they're going to make for lunch that day? It stopped happening. It just didn't happen anymore. Kids stopped being exposed to that part of sustaining humanity, to sustaining the actual human animal, right? And we got as we industrialized education, we got further and further away from those kinds of exposures, those kinds of inputs and pressures, right? You didn't have to know what plant did what as you walked home from school, like you did before the Industrial Revolution, like you did before. And there were periods of time after the Industrial Revolution began where we had to go back to that. You look at times like the Great Depression, where suddenly those types of skills became very relevant to a large number of people again. You look at like potato famines in Ireland, things like that. Those kind of disruptions of this progress that forced us back into direct contact with nature, where those kind of competencies reasserted themselves, right? So it's a slow timeline up until about World War II. And that's another, I think, real big demarcation point, right? Most of the infrastructure of the developed world was destroyed in World War II, except in the United States, right? We were an island away from that war, right? So then at the conclusion of World War II, we didn't have to rebuild our infrastructure from the Stone Age. We could just jump right into production, and our economy expanded greatly because of it. Our wealth expanded greatly because of it. We looked like a bunch of mastermind entrepreneurs after World War II. But really, we weren't starting from zero like everybody else was.
The more painful truth is that Germany had begun the second industrial revolution, and we were the inheritors.
Yes.
Of all the IQ points. So
yeah. And so that created enormous momentum and enormous trajectory away from, that really set us to outpace our ability to integrate. It set us way outside of that foundation, right? We didn't keep pace of that foundation with that kind of growth. And then, of course, we exported that to the rest of the West over the generations after World War II. And that's really where we saw this complete separate. Now we don't even recognize a need for humans to know how to source their own food. Truly, my kids' peers, they don't understand that that's even a thing. The grocery store is where food comes from.
I'm just thinking about, we had a garden. In the summer you get your vegetables from your garden,
right?
Or, you got meat from the store, but got grains from the store, but you got our summer vegetables in the garden,
right?
And in the Northwest, where I've spent most of my life, people are happy to remind you that it wasn't long ago that there were no vegetables in winter.
Right.
Yeah. There just weren't any.
Right.
So anyway, so I'm having so much fun, like painting the environmental picture that we're not getting to your actual points.
But that's an excellent point. Even for you, that kind of connection with our need to pull resources from the land is in your living memory. For the generation after you, it's not. It's not in their living memory anymore.
It's true.
There's a complete separation there now.
So is a punch in the face in my living memory.
Yeah, exactly.
So is leaving your doors unlocked.
Yes.
These are all connected. Walking to school in a fucking blizzard.
These are all connected to our ability to be adults.
Yeah. I look back at it and I don't see the stresses. Even the fights I was in, which were were all the time, right? It was
right.
I just don't view that as bad. I view it as training.
Because you could integrate them. You had a foundation upon which to integrate those stresses.
It's that you just become an adult. What's an adult meaning?
But
I know what happens.
Right.
So I'm responsible enough not to let the bad things happen in the first place.
Not carrying that in, not providing that to the next generation is how we failed them. And that's why the first chapter is called How We Failed You. They don't have that ability to integrate.
So who's we?
It's an amorphous we. It's not. There's not a single person I can point to or a single even generation.
Just trying to say I'm not. There's nothing wrong with you. It's a collective problem.
Yeah. It's like I'm not blaming the boomers or anything like that. In our conversation here, what I'm trying to do is paint the picture of the slow deterioration to the point that we're at now. And there were all good intention steps, and there were essential steps in order to get here. Yeah. Right. We had to do the Industrial Revolution. We had to do some of these things. The problem, though, is because these what I call core human competencies, that's the skill sets that I presented in the Primal Primer, because they were just part of being human, we didn't recognize them as something that had to continue to be taught once they were no longer required for daily living. They were never separate enough from us for us to recognize that we have to maintain these competencies.
So where the old argument is that if you want to ruin a country like Spain, which was formerly hardworking like Spain, you flood it with gold from the New World and teach everybody what it's like to live like, as if that's going to be permanent. Right. And then the gold goes away and you're screwed eternally.
Yeah.
Precisely because the pyramid doesn't appear, the pyramid, the base of the pyramid, like every woman, doesn't prefer to go backwards.
Right.
Doesn't like to go backwards.
Right.
All right. So, now I had my next question was how do I ask this? Is that, well, throughout history there were adulting ceremonies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had to go to communion. What's it called? What do you get when you're Catholic? You get
christening and communion and things like that.
Yeah, there's the God, I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, it's when you're in 8th grade, you get to this thing and you're like, okay, you're a responsible adult now. And I remember going through it and thinking, Mom, I can't believe you're making me do this, right? Because I'm a fan of the church. I'm just not a fan of the whole nonsense.
Right.
Especially with the nuns I had. They were so fucking mean. Anyway, so it's something other. Anyway, so we had all these rituals, and you had to earn them.
Right.
And you could fail them. So is the loss of that earning? I mean, because we know where this comes from. In the 60s, they took away all of this stuff because they didn't want people to fail. They wanted everybody to get a prize. And this is just continued, right? And that's because once mothers get into the workforce, they don't want anything to require them to do more work with their children.
Right.
Sorry, that's really where it comes from. All right, so where does how do I ask this? So are you saying that we have to have that kind of formal transition, or are you saying, well, we can just restore this kind of discipline in throughout education or culture?
So we can just restore this kind of discipline. The ritual, all of those rituals, I would call proxies for that.
Yes.
That nature feedback, right? So, but what they are, even those rites of passages and stuff, even before the ritual, right, where we had rites of passage, tribal levels and stuff like that, those were demonstrations of competencies.
Yes.
Right. They were you informing your community that you were capable of all of these skills, that you could sustain yourself, that your contributions to the tribe would be above your own subsistence.
Yes.
You would be adding value to the tribe or the group or the community. You wouldn't be extracting value from it. You would be adding value to it. And that is what it means to become a man. That is what it means to become a woman as a member of
contributing rather than drawing.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. And that's what those rituals were a proxy for as well. Right. It was that point in your transition.
You are given respect in exchange for directing your efforts to the production of the commons.
Right. Exactly. And so it was that at scale, at a bigger scale than the tribe, right? The community grows beyond that. And so
what you're saying is nobody ever fucking grows up anymore.
Right. Nobody ever grows up anymore.
That's fucking horrible.
It is terrible. And I wish I didn't have to write this book.
No, dude, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
Can I I don't have any nice drugs to sedate myself from a therapist for having to, and now I've just got to endure this. I'm allergic to alcohol. I can't even go drink what you've just told me away.
Right. Yeah. Well, part of the problem
that's
is
like you telling me, Curt, you got to be an adult then. I'm like, shit, adults being hard. Is you telling me we've all got to be adults and do hard stuff now?
Yep. Right. Time to grow up.
All right. I just want to run with that because I know we could shit talk about that for the next 30 minutes and just But we're here to do work, which is talk about the wisdom that you put in your book.
It's this is also intentional. It's a much bigger problem than the book makes it out to be, right? But the solution is very simple because each one of us can contribute to the solution, right? We just all need to learn how to grow up again.
Yeah, I got to say that for the audience, I read your book and I read Noah's book, and of course I'm working on mine. And I read it in both cases. I'm like, damn it, I want more.
Yeah.
Right. I wanted more. I wanted you to keep going.
Yes.
And so this is just practical reality of book writing, right? You can't
that and you have to walk the line between keeping it accessible to an audience that's starting from zero. And making it compelling to an audience that's deep into, some sort of methodology that's aligned with it and stuff like that, right? So there's that side of it too.
So what I would say is for myself is I thought you hit the perfect note with accessibility. I just thought that was, it's anyway. So you start out with the question. We started out with how we failed you, and then you go to what's missing.
Yeah.
All right. So you have things that are that said these things are missing, which I think you mean They're no longer present, helping us to transition into responsible adulthood that contributes to the commons,
Right.
instead of making ourselves basically infantilized dependents on the commons, consuming centuries of accumulated capital as fast as we're consuming millennia, not even millennia, millions of years of decaying trees as petroleum. The same thing's happening to our cultural capital as we're happening to the petroleum capital. Anyway,
Yep.
so you have a list here of things. So could you sort of go through what those are?
Yeah. So the next section under the what is missing, section of the book is dependence and ostracism. Right. Dependence is a big theme that I work on. It's a big theme in the book, and that's as we fail to complete that transition to adulthood, we extend our dependence.
Yes, but what happens when we do that? Oh shit! So I didn't want to take it away from you. I'm sorry. You want me to? Because you make yourself vulnerable to ostracism.
Exactly. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point of this section. And what I mean, going back to that idea of the triangle turning into a diamond shape, right? You're very, very exposed to anything that disrupts you when you don't have that foundation underneath you.
But you're throwing yourselves into the hands of women, because what do?
Yes. You're staying a child. So when you're a child, you're going to be at the hands of women. And that dependence, we're maintaining.
That's horrible.
Childish dependence.
That's 2 nights of nightmares.
Right, but we're extending that. We've got people my age and older that are completely dependent. They never learned how to sustain themselves. That means there's 40, 50, 60-year-old men that are still living in a child state. And those, when you're in that state of dependence, and what I'm getting at here, just like you said earlier,
telling a man he's a child is one thing, because some of us say, yeah, well, being a child was fucking awesome. On the other hand, you say, now you're at the fucking whims of women.
Yes,
that's a fucking nightmare.
There's I'm a big fan of fun. My background's in game design. I'm a big fan of it. Right? There's a difference between being childlike and childish.
Yes.
Right. We want our enthusiasm and our wonder to stay childlike our whole lives.
Yes, of course.
We don't want our level of responsibility to be childish. We don't want our access to agency to be childish. We don't want the systems of control to be able to exert pressure and power over us like we're children. And that's where we're at right now. That's what ostracism means here. It means I can completely control you by shutting you out of the grocery store. I can completely take over your entire system of incentives by denying you access, by turning off the water to your house. Those are levers I have when you're dependent on me.
Why does the government get to take away people's driver's licenses? For crimes that have nothing to do with their capacity to safely, driving without insurance, externalizing. Oops, I just fucked up my microphone. It's because I fidget with the cord with my left hand. If you're driving without insurance, which when you're in college you run out of money, those things happen, right? You take a risk, right? But when you're driving around without insurance and you get into accidents, now you've externalized the cost onto other people. You can't recover it, so that's a different thing. That's like, well, you're no longer operating this thing in the same, but for not paying a debt or a ticket, or why the fuck do you get to take away a guy's driver's license for that? That's anyway. So that I'm just trying to put out what I consider an egregious example that punishes really low income people.
And I would suggest that a lot of those things are downstream from these real core needs, right? Once you have a control over a population at the level of their access to food, you can pretty much do whatever the hell else you want to that population.
Yeah, but you're not. One of the things that I can see somebody looking at this, and I know you've defended against it, but it's like, it's not that you need to be a prepper. It's that you need to understand that you can control your existence.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And that because you can control your existence, you understand what existence is constitutes from. Right.
Yes.
And so I don't want people to read this and think what you're saying is that you need to become a prepper and grow your own fucking tomatoes. No, but you need to know how to grow tomatoes.
Yes. Yeah. So, and that's one of the things that's one of the things I try to reiterate as often as I can is in my perspective, in my opinion, in a healthy society that was teaching this foundation, each of us would be solidly competent in all of these skills by the time we're about 12 years old.
Yeah, but
This is
that's
not
what we used to use Boy Scouts for.
exactly, but even Boy Scouts was a recognition that these things were starting to we were starting to lose these
Lose
things,
them, right?
right? Even then, they were starting to recognize that there's a consequence to losing the skill set.
Why can't I
Right.
mean, this is one of my things. I knew how to shoot a rifle probably at age 4.
Yeah, so does my
I also
4-year-old.
know you never fucking touch one
Exactly,
without an adult in the room telling you,
and
making sure that you're not making a child's error with it.
what a lesson of responsibility for a 4-year-old that is.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, it's amazing to me, and I'm sensitive to this, so I can introspectively and analyze it pretty comfortably. It's amazing to me that I'm actually drawing upon that 4-year-old lesson when I look at other things that are risk.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yes, yes.
That I internalize. Holy shit! I have to focus with clarity, follow a sequence of rules, never vary from them, in order for this to be safe and me not hurt myself or someone else.
Right, because if you don't, nature will kill you.
Because right, and you brought up earlier. I remember the kids walking out of the factory. I mean, steam powered machines. I mean, we've seen guys, all the guys with hands like this or like this or like that, because they worked on railroads, right? I mean, it used to be how many decades that you worked on the railroad? You could tell by the number of fingers you had left, right? I mean, until they invented the railroad things we've got today. But I mean, kids working around steam powered engines, you had to be present. How many kids are present? None of them.
How many adults are present?
I mean, okay, well, great. How many adults? Yeah, not many.
Go find any street outside, and in any city, any time of day, you're going to see people plugged into their phones walking down the street. That's not a present human being.
Not present.
That's a distracted human being.
It's funny. I don't want to I'm just trying to give meaningful examples to people.
Yeah, no.
So like I used to do reloading. You know why you do reloading? Really? You save money. But you know why I really do it? Mindfulness.
Yeah.
You can't make a mistake with gunpowder, primer, and pressure, right? You don't make mistakes. For me, if I was stressed, I'd go load a couple 100 rounds of ammunition. I had no reasonable economic reason to reload, other than it was the only thing that took my freaking attention. 100%, because the risk of not taking my attention was so high. And I'm calling on a 4-year-old's discipline with a rifle that I can't really fire because it's so, even a 22 when you're 4 is just like, it's bigger than you, right? I mean, it's be in the kitchen, and the second floor kitchen, the window, looking out at the cornfields, right? Anyway.
Yeah.
So dependence versus an ostracism, reliance versus dependence. What is reliance versus dependence?
So one of the other avenues of work that I've explored is this distinction between active and passive, right? Where all of our virtues, all of our actions, they have an active state and they have a passive state, right? So reliance it's the same thing, right? Being able to tap into others for access to resources, right? That's reliance and dependence. Right, reliance is the active state of that. It means we're performing an exchange of value in order to have access to each other's resources. That could be an exchange of I'm willing to protect you, and in exchange for you protecting me, I'll defend your property if you defend my property. Those are all forms of reliance. Dependence is not an exchange of value. Dependence is an exchange of need. Right? It's like I'm going to my existence requires that I interact with you in this specific way. I'm incapable of existing without that interaction. Right. That's a passive state of that form of interaction, of that exchange of resources, right? But
your child is slave or serf,
right? Yes, exactly. We get into that next chapter specifically. So, no, it's a good segue for that next conversation. But that's what I mean. That's what I mean when I say active versus passive. That applies to all virtues. It basically applies to all human action, right? There's an active state and a passive state. We want to stay in that active state as much as we can, as often as we can. We're trying to build ourselves so that we're capable of that active state as much as we can.
We want the capacity,
right,
to be in an active state in case we need to be, even if we have given ourselves the opportunity to be in a relaxed state.
Right.
which is
Yeah,
different
and,
from a passive state.
right, exactly. And there's a little bit of nuance in there because active and passive isn't necessarily relaxed can be an active state. What I'm talking here more is about agency and choice than it is about any kind of specific behavior. Are you the owner of that incentive, or is somebody else the owner of that incentive?
Mm.
When you're the owner of the incentive, it's active for you. When somebody else is the owner of that incentive, it's passive for you.
Yeah.
Right. So, but
hold on. I just want to. Can we? I'm sorry, but I want to add 3 dimensions there.
Yes, absolutely.
Active, relaxed, and passive. I'm more concerned about the difference between relaxed and competent and passive and incompetent. Reactive. In other words, there's active, competent. There's at rest or relaxed and competent. There's passive and fucking stupid because you're dependent, right? I mean, right, because that's the difference, right? You have these 2 things. All right, so I just want to say that because if I were trying to look for a fault in this, I say, well, I want to be in a relaxed state. I mean, you're missing the point. It's whether you're capable or not.
Yeah.
Right? Is your relax based on dependence? Or is your lace based on the fact that you're competent? Right,
exactly. Okay. And that's the output of all of this is to achieve a state of relaxed readiness, no matter what confronts you. Right. That's the ideal that this aims itself at, that this whole work aims itself at, is that the environments around you, you're no longer reacting to the environments around you, because that's a passive state. You are responding to the environments around you because you are in a state of relaxed readiness, able to confront whatever challenges emerge from those environments.
Which is where adult confidence comes from.
It is. So because the readers, I assume most of the people reading the book haven't followed my work outside of the book, back on the Facebook days and on Twitter and things like that, and the work we've done at the Natural Law Institute and stuff like that. So I'm not presenting the active passive switch here in the book. That's not where I start the conversation. Yes. I started as reliance versus dependence and use that as an example of this active passive switch. Just like tolerance and forbearance is another example that's easy for people to key into, but it's all just this concept of active versus passive.
Here's a funny question. Like, this is all accessible, but like, I ever wonder, like, you could put in they have no idea what you're capable. I know what you're capable of, right? They have no freaking idea. They don't know this isn't Johnny Appleseed.
No.
Doc, right? They don't know that. They don't know that you've distilled it down to that. Whereas if you wanted to create the formal reasoning behind any of these points, you probably write that more easily.
Yes, that'd be far easier for me to write. And if it was just me deciding to write the book I wanted to write, that'd be the book I wrote.
Yes,
this is the book that had to come out. The Primer had to come out, right?
Right.
Because the people that I'm seeing, they need what's in the Primal, right? So that would have been my preference. So,
well, I mean, I'm just wondering. I wouldn't do this, and I wouldn't recommend it. But if you just imagine for a minute that for each one of these examples, these statements, you had 3. Because I have somebody doing this from your work right now. 3 Luke Weinhagen quotes, right, that illustrated this in what's basically our formal logic.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Or that before you got into this chapter, you started out with the necessity for violence and worked upward.
Yes.
Right. It's like they don't understand. You're capable of that, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But it's not obvious when they're reading it, which is kind of funny to me. I'm not sure why I find that so humorous. It's like they don't realize, it's like when I'm going to call you Grandpa for a minute. I'm sorry, but you're not too far away from Grandpa status thing. Another decade, maybe. I'm a Grandpa already. But if Grandpa Luke or Uncle Luke is telling you this stuff when you're a kid, right? It's coming across to you in language that he can tell you because he remembers being a kid like you, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. But the answer is that he actually knows the science of it, and you wouldn't understand it if he told it to you in that form.
One of the things I try to communicate to especially the guys in our community is that all of these concepts can be communicated to any audience, but you have to change your context and you have to change your vocabulary.
Yeah, you have not succeeded in getting me there, though. But
no, and I don't expect.
I'm sorry, I'm just teasing.
But we talk a lot about how do we reach this group or how do we reach that group, and that's how. But I grew up. My mom did in-home childcare. My mom she had a degree in early childhood behavior and early childhood psychology, but she did in-home childcare so that my brothers and I would grow up with a parent in the house. Right? That was her reason for doing it. Right, but that meant I grew up surrounded by kids of all different kinds my whole childhood. Right, that's the experience I had growing up. Right, so I learned how to navigate and interact and communicate with kids like they're people, right? They weren't some strange separate species of human. They're just people with a very different frame than an adult frame, right? So I had to learn, as I was growing up, I had to learn how to navigate those different frames and communicate with those different frames. That's just part of my daily life, right? So it comes naturally to me in ways that doesn't come to a lot of other people, right? But all it is a changing of the context and a changing of the vocabulary to present the same concept.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
So I get it. So then, I think we finally got the message. I wanted to make sure that message got across. That got across. So, the next one's boredom, apathy, and childishness.
Right. So now that we've established what's missing, we've talked about the dangers that come out of dependence, and we've talked about the distinction between reliance and dependence in that active and passive state. Now, what we want to start learning is how to recognize that childishness as we look about and see what's going on in the world, right? We're seeing adults behaving like children. We're seeing politicians throwing tantrums. We're seeing people claiming or positioning themselves in positions of responsibility, avoiding responsibility. We're seeing the behavior of children across all domains, across all of society, and across all of social media. And we're seeing it get worse and worse, right? And that's kind of what I'm starting to try to help people recognize in that section of the book, right? Is we've extended childhood into adulthood, and now we're seeing the effects of that adult childishness manifest themselves across all human interaction, at least in the West.
It doesn't take long, does it?
No, it doesn't. It sets in fast. It says, to the point now where there's this expectation, there's this sense of entitlement that we're going to use your names that deviate from reality, your identity that deviates from reality. That is a childish entitlement. That is someone that is completely dependent and takes that dependence for granted. And yet that's normalized. That's codified into laws in some places in the West.
Yeah.
That is, it doesn't get more childish than having childishness codified into law.
Okay. So the next section, you talk about the reasons for immaturity and lack of development. And this, entitlement is just childishness, right?
Yes. Entitlement is an inversion of dependence. It's trying to blame or make other people guilty for your dependence.
Yes.
Right. And as children, we can accept some of that, right? Children take their world for granted. Mm-hmm. But adults shouldn't.
Well, no,
right.
Right. Everybody else to work with.
Yeah. Well, one of the ways we recognize that failure to transition into adulthood is seeing an adult do that same thing, take that things for granted. That entitlement that's becoming more and more widespread is a diagnostic of our level of dependence, because all entitlement is just an expression of dependence.
Correct. And your child, you're looking for parental care because you want to externalize the responsibility back to a parent, and you're rebelling against the parent when they won't take the responsibility from you that you.
Right. Yeah.
And because you're a child and you don't know how to handle responsibility because you've never been trained. Yep. Because you've been isolated from the consequences.
Yep. Give me one. Sorry, family just got home and there's a bunch of noise.
And then so you've built this up, these sequences. The next one is that you call the beholden dependent.
Right, and this is where I go into the concept of when you're a dependent, you are by necessity you're required to keep those you're dependent on amenable to continue providing for that dependency. You have to collaborate with them. You have to obey their words. You have to keep them happy to continue providing for you, right? So it really puts you in a position of servitude towards their preferences.
Mhm.
And we saw some huge evidence of that with the lockdowns and the response to the pandemic, as we saw people going along because of they're dependent on the system for having their needs met. They couldn't question it.
The lack. I mean, for some things you can understand. One is that you can understand that why people would be fooled by it's the science, right? Without knowing that. You need to take a.
Nope,
So
I'm fine.
we can drag a family member in.
Sure.
Into the. Hi, Munchkin. How are you?
Good.
You love your daddy? Yes. You tell everybody your name?
Agatha.
Agatha. I think you're really cute, Agatha. Do you think you look like your mommy or your daddy?
My mommy.
Fortunately.
Thank you, sweetie.
Yeah, so that state of the beholden dependent, and that's it also impacts the depth of our relationships, right? If you're my need provider, I can replace you with any other need provider, including a government,
Yes.
right? Because it's not an exchange of value. I'm not relying on you for anything. I'm dependent on you. As long as that dependency is being met, then you're pretty much interchangeable with anyone that can meet that dependency. And we see that in the shallowness of our relationships these days. We see that in hookup culture. We see that in the widespread divorce and things like that. We're seeing a lack of depth being generated in relationship, right? And that dependence is playing a role in that. I'm not saying it's the only factor, but it's playing a role in that. Whereas when we have that reliance, when we have that exchange of value, then you and I, we maintain a relationship because I value how we can exchange with each other. I value your ability to contribute to me and my ability to contribute to you. It's not a dependency. I can't replace you with somebody else. I can't swap somebody else in and get that same exchange of value that I'm getting with you. Right. So it's a very different depth of relationship that you have under dependence than you have when you have that foundation of being self-sufficient, at least for those basic needs. Right. So that's what I'm getting at in that section of the beholden dependent.
Yeah, I would. We've gone over our hour, so I have an instinct where I'd like to work on that exchanges part, because I think the exchanges applies all the way back, and I think that's actually more important than. I think that's the ability to enter into exchanges and the productive result of exchanges that is higher than what can be achieved on your own, even though you feel like you're making some sacrifices.
Right.
I don't think that's obvious, nor do I think it's obvious that those exchanges prevent the problem of kicking the can down the road, which means you're going to be sad, lonely, and sick.
Right. Yeah. And that's part of the give and take of presenting this material is I have to build a kind of a structure to hang some of these concepts off of before I can even introduce some of these concepts. That one right there that you're talking about, that's one of the biggest, in my opinion, that's one of the biggest concepts in the whole book is how this expanding dependence undermines our ability to cooperate, our ability to exchange productively, our ability
you're
to
making your argument is, I mean, I would reduce it to my computational terms as you're not capable of computation, evolutionary computation, until you're involved in cooperation.
Right.
And cooperation consists of exchanges, which produces a surplus that can't be obtained by individual means.
Right.
And so if I just look at it as physics, I'm like, you're basically, whenever you're dependent, you're draining capital.
Right.
And whenever you're cooperating and you're in a relationship, and you're actually producing capital, and that capital has durability over time, where what you think you're doing by obtaining this freedom and luxury and whatever is actually burning the future capital that you would need to draw upon when you're no longer as able. And so I just see it as incredibly foolish, but that's because I guess I understand it. But I think that whole value, the importance of that maturity is the ability to be responsible in exchange.
Yes.
Right. Is is a non-trivial lesson.
Yes,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And cooperation, its value is in that surplus. And if you're extracting as much as you're contributing, you're not creating a surplus. You're not doing cooperation.
Yeah. Okay, so I didn't understand this. We have to go all the way to the bottom is your next point. You say, wait, what?
Right.
Is
Yeah.
that, I don't remember if that's a chapter head.
No, wait. What is one of the sections inside chapter 1? Is one of the sections, and
Okay,
that note there about we
remember
haven't gone to the right. So what this section is talking about is, so I've just made the argument that we're all children.
Yes.
And so people's response to that is, wait, what? I'm not a child. I'm out there living my best life. I can.
How do you know?
Right. I can go to the store and get everything I want, this and that, right? I mean, I have access to all these adult things, which aren't really adult things, right? It's all dependence. And in this section, I also talk about how some others have explored these same concepts, but failed to reach the conclusions I've reached, right? You look at, like some of the examples I use are, various YouTube channels that are teaching people how to do adulting, right? How to use a can opener because they never used a can opener and things like that. And even guys like Jordan Peterson with his clean your room. He's identifying this same problem, but he's not going deep enough to find the solution.
Is he caught up with you on the it starts with force thing? Because it sounds like he's got there lately.
Maybe. I don't know. I've not.
I don't know. I would have figured if anybody knew he'd got there, it would be you. But
yeah,
I've seen him say that recently.
I still see a lot of value in his work. I just wish he would course correct for the stuff that I'm talking about here specifically. Yeah. He frames all of his solutions from within the scope of civilization. In order to clean your room,
and
you have to take for granted that you have a room. Right. Whereas I expand my solution set into humanity, not civilization. I mean, we existed as a creature in an environment far longer outside of civilization than we did inside of civilization.
You're going to base humanity, not trying to justify civilization.
Right.
You've got to be at least human first.
Yes.
Before we can even talk about civilization.
Yeah.
And that's what you're okay.
You have to construct a room before you can clean it.
Yes. Okay, I got it.
And so that's the big.
Now I understand.
That's what this section is talking about, is how they've all identified the problem correctly. They've not identified the solution correctly because they're stopping at the scope of civilization. They're taking civilization for granted, and I don't. And that's what I mean by that. That's what I'm accounting for the unseen in that, where they're not accounting for the unseen in that.
So I just had a flashback or a deja vu of being in 7th grade logic class. Believe it or not, I got taught logic in 7th grade. Whoa, were you taught logic? Probably fucking never.
Right.
But I got taught logic. And this concept of cleaning your room actually came up. Right. And I didn't remember it until you just, for some reason, put those things together. I'm like, oh God, where have I been this before? Oh, I've been through this before. Right. Anyway, but I love how you've disambiguated. We're not starting with this justification of civilization, and because he's basically trying to justify mythology.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
He's a secular theologian, right? First and foremost, and everything on top of that is justifying his secular theology, which he views as the way to give therapy to humans, because he's in the business of fixing broken people. And we're in the business of making sure they don't get fucking broken in the first place.
Right. Yes.
Which is very different.
We're hardening humans against that form of broken.
We don't want you to, we're trying to prevent you from getting broken.
Yes.
You have to have all this justificationary nonsense in order to get unbroken. Okay.
Yeah. And a lot of very well-intentioned thinkers are stuck in that same scope. Yeah. That's justifying civilizational scope. Right. And that's a hindrance to solving the problem that they've identified even, right? So that's kind of where I'm stepping into that whole field, is that I'm expanding the scope of it to look at the human that underlies civilization, not just the civilizational layer, right? And so that's, where we had, Freud just looking at broken people to establish his baselines. And we had Maslow come in and he added healthy people and looked at both healthy and unhealthy people to establish his baselines. My layer is the next layer on top of that. It's looking at healthy and broken people in civilization and healthy and broken people outside of civilization to establish my baselines for what I'm building, the work
it's
I'm
like
doing.
everything we do, right? You're building from first principles.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And, I mean, so the problem is it sounds like self-help. It's not. It sounds like philosophy. It's not.
Right. Yeah.
It's actually science because we're constructing it from first principles.
Yeah.
Right. But the problem is we just talk about it. We speak of it in those terms. It's completely inaccessible.
Right. Right.
So,
yeah. And it's one of those, it's a very complex piece of work that I'm hoping presents very simply.
I think, well, of course, I read it because I think I can't remember if you sent me a preview or, I mean, I bought it on Amazon, so I assume I bought it the day it came out, right? And I read it right away, and I was thinking, oh my God, there's a lot of deep here, but has everybody recognized the deep that's there? That's why I was left wanting more. Anyway, so we've spent. I was trying to keep this at an hour. We've gone an hour and 15 minutes or so, and so that was chapter 1. Right?
Yes.
Do you feel like we got across what you wanted to get across?
Absolutely, and the next 2 sections of the book, the what kind of book is this? That just makes the distinction between like you've identified.
I didn't see that. Sorry, I didn't go to the next page. I didn't realize.
Oh yeah,
I thought we were done.
No, it's the conversation we were just having though. It's not a self-help book. It's not a prepper book. It's not a psychology book or any number of other categories, that it could be, pigeonholed into. It really is just this. It's the book to recreate the cult of competence that is necessary for the transition from childhood to adulthood. You need to have a cult of competence that supports that.
You know what's going to happen, dude? If you try to get people back in the cult of competence, that means the cult of adulthood, and that means back to masculinity. And there's a war against that right now, and that's just going to be hard. Because what is masculinity other than the last resort, which is force, to preserve responsibility?
I want the best of what it means to be man and the best of what it means to be woman to reach fatherhood and motherhood together. So
yes, exactly.
That is my aim, explicitly my aim. And then the last section is just why you want to know this, even if you don't need to. It's the same thing I was talking about earlier with the physical fitness stuff, right? We have there's in order for us to optimize our expression, we have to have these pressures. And because we don't have direct access to the pressures largely anymore, we have to have proxies for these pressures. Right,
I'm not sure. I think you've succeeded with me, and this is what I do for a living, right? At the other end of the spectrum, you succeeded in convincing me that we need to work from the bottom up, right?
Right.
And I don't know. It convinced me. I'm pretty difficult to convince,
right?
So I'd have to give my 2 cents that you succeeded. I just want the next book already.
Yeah, well, like I said, steps in the process. The intent is more writing, so that is the aim here. But this I think is a solid start. So
I'm having a rude interruption here. Sorry. So Luke, we've gone over the first chapter.
Yep.
Now we're gonna put out a video for every chapter, right?
Yep.
How many chapters are there? Forgot.
Sorry, forgot offhand. I think there's 16. Yeah, 16 chapters.
Well, and so we said when we started was we'll just play it by ear. We'll try to keep them around an hour, right?
Yeah.
That might get, like in this case, I expected to cover more than one chapter, and it turned out that chapter 1 was pretty fascinating. All right, because you're building a foundation, so that should be expected. Yeah. So we'll just keep putting these out until we have the whole book covered.
Yep.
I now think that it's going to be at least an hour a chapter, because there's just no way that, given the reductive method you explained everything, that we can't embellish upon that with color and in context for a long time, despite the brevity of any given chapter.
Right.
Right. So,
Yeah.
all right. So did you get out of this what you wanted to today?
Yeah,
'Cause
no, I really appreciate it. It's good to have this conversation, and every iteration, even my own iterations through the material, I gain something new out of it. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate the opportunity.
Now, are you doing? Is there an audio version of this book coming out?
Oh yeah, it's already out. The audio is out. There's even a video book if people want to sit and watch me read it to them. So there's audio,
Really?
video, there's hardcover, there's paperback, there's all
Like,
kinds of stuff.
what are you wearing when you're reading this video?
Just a button up shirt. It's just normal me.
You don't wear a Santa Claus outfit or
No,
Odin
that'd be fun, but that's not the role I'm playing.
Wearing a pair of old pajamas and
There is
smoking jacket.
so I did a presentation of my my basic situational awareness trading program. I did a presentation of that for the people that bought the book in the first week or so, and then I as a bonus I've uploaded that recording to the video book as well. So anyone that buys the video book gets access to the audio book, the ebook, and that presentation. So
wait a minute, I didn't know anything about this. Okay, so
Yeah.
I didn't know I could recommend people go watch the video version.
Sure.
So it's it up on Amazon as well?
It's not on Amazon. It's on Gumroad. It's linked through my website, corehumancompetence.com. It's linked on there. So
Dude, we're friends, and I didn't even know you did this.
yeah, it was a lot of recording.
There's a lot of recording. All right, now I've got to go watch the damn recorded version, mostly because I'll just get a chuckle out of watching.
Right? Yeah.
You do this, but because I already know the material. But anyway, love you, brother. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. We'll look forward to the next chapter.
Absolutely. Thanks for the chat today.
I'm going to put the links to your book, audio book, and the video, and your website in the, because I can't do them off the top of my head,
Right.
in the bottom. All right.
Absolutely. Yep.
Take care, brother.
All right. Thanks a lot.